In reflecting on what I want to share with you this evening, I have realized preparing a sermon is a lot easier than preparing a talk on a mission trip you just completed. What I am calling the talk this evening is Mission Peterborough, God's Providence in Action. The first thing I want to do is thank the elders and thank all of you for supporting my family in going to Canada. The elders decided that they would pay for our Airbnb while we were up there, and that was truly appreciated. And I also want to thank everyone who came and walked my dog in 95 plus degree weather. My dad told me that several of you were dripping with sweat and he encouraged you not to come back. But specifically, I want to thank Miss Savannah, because Miss Savannah came every Monday during the month of July to walk my dog Gemma. So Savannah, I see you. Thank you very much for looking after Gemma while I was away. When we think about doing mission trips, the verses that generally come to mind, I think first and foremost would be in Romans chapter 10, verses 14 through 17. How shall they call on him whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe on him whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the gospel of peace, who bring glad tidings of good things. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our report? So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Paul was concerned with his brethren Israel because they had a zeal for God, but not according to the truth. He wanted them to be saved, but alas, there was a dilemma. How would anybody, including his brethren, hear the gospel preached unless somebody was willing to go and unless there were those who were willing to send them? In this work, what I see first and foremost is the willingness to send and to go. This congregation was willing to send my family, and of course, we were willing to go to preach to our brethren in Peterborough. And so this is a good work, it is a scriptural work, and it is one that we can continue to participate in moving forward. And so as we think about some high-level statistics of what happened, we were on the road for 33 days. It took us 30 hours round trip to get to Canada. We are gluttons for punishment. We like to drive. We don't fly in the Schrader family on account of Papa Schrader is scared of flying. We covered 1,993 miles. We were available to teach because I took a few days off so we could do some sightseeing for 22 days. And in those 22 days, we did 22 lessons. Now, most of those lessons were either on Sunday, Wednesday, or Saturday, but we did have a few sprinkled through the week. The Bible studies that we led were in two languages, Mandarin Chinese, which I do not speak at all, and of course good old English, which I like to think I have fluency. And along the way, a data engineer who likes to dabble in computer programming, that's me, created a translation app so I could better understand our friends from China who were speaking in Mandarin to each other so I could communicate with them. And of course, when you think of the blessings of taking this trip with my family, that is the symbol for infinite. I can't count, I can't sum up, I can't put into words how amazing this trip was. for my family from the very beginning all the way through the very end. It was just truly a blessing from God to be able to do. And there were times where Lisa and I talked to each other, especially on the day we celebrated our anniversary, which was July 10th. Did you ever think that at some point in our lives we would take a trip to a foreign country to teach the Bible to people? And the answer was no, but we were so glad that we found out about this trip and were able to make it. And so what I first want to do, I'm going to give numbers at times. I'm going to say first and second, and I hope that that flows well, because I've just realized that I've already been talking for like 10 minutes, and I'm getting to my first actual point, but I've already made a bunch of points. Anyway, the Mission Peterborough, you're going to see these slides at some point, and these are the ones where we're going to do our numbering. So the first point I want to talk about is the genesis of this trip. And so hopefully you can read this slide. But basically, to give you a little background before we go through these slides, on Tuesday of this week, David Carroza and I were talking about how could we take the work that I was doing in Smyrna and begin to grow it. We both realized that there were other congregations in the United States and in other places that could use some preaching, but how would we really make that happen? And so the conversation on a Tuesday ended with David and I saying, wouldn't it be cool if we could get an Airbnb for a month, and then you could go and stay in that with your family and preach? And I was like, yeah, that would be a really good idea. Now, the title of this lesson is Mission Peterborough, God's Providence in Action. 2 days later, at 10:34 p.m., David received an email from Jeff Smelser. Jeff knew Cecilia and Joseph Ma because his father converted them while they lived in China 30 years ago. So David gets this email at 10:34 p.m. At 10:35 p.m., he forwards it to me and says, well, Providence, ? Now, I had to sit on this for a little while because partially I was blown away, partially it was at night, and Lisa and I were talking in bed about how we could make this happen. But I looked at her, and as I was speaking about just wanting to go but not wanting to go, she was like, we could go in July. And I'm like, great, we're going to go in July. And so, but just before midnight, I responded to David and said, we'd like to go, we can go during the summer, and then, this is really neat. That's an understatement. And so that's how this planning began. And so I got in contact with Joseph and Cecilia Ma, and you'll get to see them in just a few minutes. And we kind of put together a plan for our going up there. I was going to teach Bible classes on Sunday morning. Going to do the sermon on Sunday morning. We are going to have a Bible study with their Chinese friends on Sunday evening. I teach on Wednesdays, and then twice a month on Saturdays, we'd have 2 lessons at 1 p.m. and at 2 p.m. So that was the plan going into this work. And along the way, to get to Peterborough, we stopped at the Ark Encounter. You can see the kids and you can see the ark behind them. We learned a lot of cool things, like all the animals could fit in the boat and that there would be plenty of room. And they had a flood of refills at the concession stand, which I thought was hilarious. But if you've never been to the Ark exhibit, it is a really neat place to go. It's definitely faith building, and I would encourage you to go and check it out. In nearby Williamton, Kentucky, which is just south of Cincinnati, I would suggest to you, don't go to Columbus. Columbus, Ohio is not the best city. They have a terrible university there, and the fire alarm went off at 3 o'clock in the morning while we spent the night. I did not appreciate that at all. We ended up going to Niagara Falls. This is a picture of the kids on the right. Elena wanted to get her picture made as a cartoon character, and I said, hey, I could use ChatGPT and do that real quick. And so that's what was rendered. Niagara Falls is an amazing place. If you haven't had a chance to go there, you should definitely go there. It's very fun, and there are people who will actually draw caricatures of you if you're willing to pay them about $20. And so we get through our trip up there, countless bathroom breaks, and ultimately we make it to our Canadian home. And this is where we spent the month. I've never lived in a place with a Canadian flag proudly flying in the front yard, but for this month I did, and it was kind of neat to see that. The weather was wonderful. There were days where it was 77 degrees outside. I wanted a jacket, and while I drank coffee on the front porch. I know it was like 95 to 98 degrees here during that time, but it was wonderful in Canada. This is where I worked. I watched the Tour de France while putting together my PowerPoints for preaching and drinking coffee. And then I also found this other candy that I really like. It's like a Kit Kat bar, but it tastes like coffee. And that is what I ran on for the month. I ate at least 3 bags of those. Also had Jeffrey Maw, who is Joseph and Cecilia's son, make me a coffee crisp cake, which I ate a lot of that too. It was wonderful. And so we get to Peterborough, and one of the first things we see is that they also refer to this place as the Borough. Welcome to the Borough. We didn't know it, but we were going to the Canadian equivalent of our borough, which is Murfreesboro. Now, if you're in town and you're driving in certain places, it's going to look exactly the same. There's a McDonald's. There's a Walmart. If you go just a little bit further down, they have a Baskin Robbins there. I've spent a lot of time in all those places. And of course, Jeffrey Maw, big fan of McDonald's. I didn't know that, but he really likes it. He always wanted to go to McDonald's. I'm like, dude, we can go somewhere else. He's like, let's go to McDonald's. He loves it. But there are things that are different. The money looks very different. It might remind you of like Monopoly money. It has a fun feel to it. It's very colorful, a lot of neat pictures on it. And of course, they use the metric system up there. So they have liters. We filled up our gas for 69 Canadian dollars, which is the equivalent of like 0.75 American dollars. That's 52 liters. And the way that they say their gas price, it's not like 1.39, which we might do, but it's just 131.3 cents Canadian. I just thought that was very, very odd, but that's how they did things. If you go to a grocery store, you are not going to see a single gallon of milk. Not a one. You're going to see the plastic cartons, smaller sizes. Very odd, in my opinion, as an American, but maybe they think that's normal. In Peterborough, they have a lock lift. This was so cool. There's basically this boat path, and you can see at the top of the picture, there's the river, and then at the bottom of the picture, there's the river, and they got this lift. And so on the other picture, the boats will go into that lift, and they will lower the boats down, and then they'll keep on their journey. This is what Peterborough is famous for. It's a very cool thing, and we actually weren't able to take the ferry, but we timed it perfectly so we could get that picture of the boat going into the lock. And so that's Peterborough. There's about 60,000 people there. It's not a very large city. It's surrounded by farmland. And of course, there's their church family there. So they meet in a rented facility in a strip mall. We had to drive past this sign, and then we went to the back of the building to see where we were to enter. And then, of course, they've got a sign that says Church of Christ with an arrow pointing to their meeting space. And they met from 10 a.m. for Bible study and then 11 a.m. for worship. And so this is the first day that we were teaching there, and you can see some people. I want to bring up the fact that the man in the back, his name is Carl, and his wife's name is Lori. After this lesson, Carl led the closing prayer, and I thought he was going to lose it. He was probably more amped than I was, and I was sweating through my clothes. But I mean, that prayer that he led was just filled with passion, and that was the way he was the whole time he was there. He's just a very, very encouraging guy. And ultimately what happened, and why I want to talk about Carl for a minute, is because he is an immigration official. So we got through on the 4th of July because we were deemed no threat to the Canadian economy. I didn't know my kids that well, but no threat to the Canadian economy. And on the third Sunday, there was a guy named Brandon Hawk who was supposed to also come and preach for the month. Unfortunately, he was stopped at the border and turned back. And so Carl now is aware of this situation. So as they have people coming to work with them in the future, Carl is going to make sure that everything is taken care of so that nobody coming up to work with them will be unable to get past the border. So I really appreciate Carl for that. His wife Lori invited the kids and Lisa over to their house so they could have a day on the water. They have a boat and they went fishing, and they're just a really, really neat couple, and I appreciated them a lot. We studied on 1 John. We were able to go through the whole book of 1 John, and then we also had studies on Saturdays on the minor prophets. And this is where we were studying. You can't see Bob, but he was sitting next to his wife Caroline, and there's Joseph, and then you can see Cecilia's shoulder. We'll get more to them in a minute, but they're very serious Bible students. They had a lot of great questions. They made really good comments about applications that could be made about the minor prophets, and I really appreciated them for their willingness to be there on a Saturday when they had other things that they could do. It was really cool. And so this is another thing that happened. Now, you'll notice that Lisa and I are not in this picture. I didn't take a picture of the potluck, but you'll see in the back, that's Brandon Hawk and his wife. He's the one in the beard. They're the ones who unfortunately weren't able to make it up on the third Sunday of the month. But I want to start on it's going to be on my right, it's going to be on your left. But that curly-haired guy with the glasses, that guy's name's RJ. RJ's a really neat guy. He works for a shipping company. He's a manager, real serious about his work, but he's also a huge fan of mathematics. And I know that we all know somebody here in our congregation who is a huge fan of mathematics, and that is Evan Lancaster. And so one day while I was talking with RJ about putting together Bible study lessons, he started talking to me about math. And I immediately knew that I was out of my depth, but I also knew that my coworker Evan was going to be driving home from work at that very time, and I bet he would enjoy having a wonderful conversation on mathematics with RJ. So I gave him a call, and they talked for a good 30 minutes about why Evan was right and why RJ is wrong. Now, RJ then wrote me an email that I need to forward now to Evan on like 30 reasons why he's right and Evan's wrong. So it's going to be a really good conversation, I'm sure, moving forward. Now, RJ's a good guy. He's wanting to get into teaching more, and so I'm going to be working with him some moving forward. If you go over, that's Bob and Caroline. Bob is a tough guy. He worked for the Canadian police for his whole life until he retired. And while he was working for the Canadian police, he met Caroline. And I hope he shared this story, so it's free game. So he wanted to ask out Caroline, and he thought Caroline was Marge. And so he asked out Marge. It turns out Marge and Caroline were roommates, and it was all confusing. And so Bob had to tell Marge, unfortunately, that he meant to ask out Caroline, her roommate. And, that would have been an awkward situation if you were staying together and you thought one guy liked you. It turns out he liked the other one. But it all worked out well for Bob and Caroline. They've been married for a long time. And the lady behind them is their daughter, Leslie Yeager. Now, for some of you, you might recognize the name Yeager because Mitch Davis's daughter is married to Leslie's son, and they just had a baby, Goldie. So while we were up in Canada that last week, Leslie came down here to Franklin, Tennessee. We drove by Franklin, Indiana on the way home, but Franklin, Tennessee, to stay with her son and daughter-in-law and celebrate the birth of their granddaughter, Goldie. We come over a little more, and you can see two kids. You have Christian and Sebastian, and their mother there is Helly. And the very encouraging lady, her husband's name's Daniel. I don't have a picture of Daniel, but they were there every week. The kids really enjoyed playing with Christian and with Sebastian, and it was just a really cool time to see our kids playing with other kids. And then last but certainly not least, you have Joseph and Cecilia, and never have I been treated as well as I was treated by Joseph and Cecilia. They had us over on Saturday. They had us over on Sunday. They came over on Tuesday. We had to eat out like twice the whole month. She made deviled eggs, and they were so good, and she just made them over and over and over again. She found out that Lisa has celiac, so she made sure that the things that she made, Lisa could eat. They're just wonderful people. They're always there. They're servants, and I just can't say enough good things about them. They are wonderful people, and they are just, pillars in this congregation. And I'm blessed to have met them, and I look forward to when we can see each other again. Joseph and Cecilia. One more thing before that. I want to talk more about Joseph and Cecilia, but I do know that the last week we were there was a fire upstairs, and what you can see here is that the roof collapsed in our meeting place. And fortunately, we weren't there. That would have all landed on Lisa and the kids. But as of this morning, everything's getting cleaned up, and they should be back to meeting in that space in a few weeks, but they're currently meeting in a boardroom at the Comfort Inn. So just wanted to give everybody an update on that. So things are progressing, but hopefully they'll be able to get back in there pretty soon. And so I've introduced you to Joseph and Cecilia, and so I want to talk about the Chinese Bible study. So Joseph and Cecilia are from China. They moved to Canada several years ago. Joseph was sharing with us some of the difficulties that he had while he was a Christian in China. It's very difficult over there for people. They had to be very quiet when they sang. They had to move different places with their meetings because if the government found out about it, they could have gotten into a lot of trouble. And so now they're in Canada and they can freely assemble. And so all of the people who they know who have since moved over from China to Canada, they are inviting them into their homes on Sunday evenings for a Bible study. And there's about 15 people who show up. And it's not the same 15 people each Sunday. There's different people there. But they bring food, we all have dinner, and then after that we have a Bible study. And that Bible study can last for up to 2 hours. And as I said, it can be in English and in Mandarin. I imagine it's mainly in Mandarin when, Lisa and I and the kids aren't there. Oh, I really appreciated the kids playing with the other kids. They were outside playing soccer and a bunch of other games to distract the kids so we could have the study. And they did a really good job of that. And I really do appreciate Elena, Anderson, and Austin limiting how much they interrupted us during the studies. We were really able to focus on what was being said, and it was really cool. And so this is at our second Bible study, and I am pulling up the translation program right now. We went over Genesis 21, 22, and 23. That's what they were studying at the time. And like I said, most of the time I would be speaking in English, and then Cecilia, when she felt like a translation would need it, would start speaking in Mandarin. And then Shan, who's sitting diagonal across from me, she's got her hand up like this. She is a very knowledgeable Bible student, and she would want to talk about Abraham's faith or Sarah's faith. And she brought up a lot of really good points for the first week, none of which I understood. But on the second week, I created a Bible program and then was using ChatGPT. And so you can see here, what I was doing was I was recording what was being said in Mandarin, and then I was asking for it to be translated from Mandarin into English, and so it was able to do a really good job at that. And so from that point forward, I actually understood what Shan said, and I hope I will never forget the first time I told her that I thought her comments on Sarah were excellent. We emphasize Abraham and his faith often, but we don't always think about Sarah, but she's mentioned in Hebrews as a person of great faith, and it had to be difficult for her when she hears this promise that from her, she's the one who's going to be having the children, there's going to be this great nation. So she made a lot of excellent points, and it was really cool to be able to understand what she was saying in her language and then speak back to her in English. And so this is everyone who was at the study, and I'll say a few things about some of them. That guy in the Puma shirt, he has a PhD in geology. And the first night that I met him, he asked me to explain to him why I thought God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I didn't know it at the time. He believes in a creator. But I didn't know it at the time, and so I really had to gather my thoughts to explain to him why I believe that God created the heavens and the earth. Now, it's interesting because we might think, well, everybody knows about the Bible, everybody knows about the creation story, and for a lot of us, we all believe it. Kind of take it for granted. In China, they are taught from the time they are little that the Bible and everything in it is just a bunch of myths, and really it's created to give people a sense of belonging. But you don't need that sense of belonging because you have the nation. And so we're studying with people, and some of them, they've never heard the Bible, or they've been told from the time they were young that everything about the Bible is just a bunch of myths. That there are people in this Bible study who wanted more information on creation. And so I put together really a list of different videos, different internet sites to try to help them walk through as unbiased as possible reasons for why people believe and have conviction that God in fact created the heavens and the earth. And so I asked them to look at a couple of movies. One is Evidence for a Creator. Another one is by Ben Stein, where he talks about the intelligent design in the movement in universities to squash that idea altogether. And then I gave them a debate between Richard Dawkins and between John Lennox, which I think is just a wonderful debate where you can hear both sides. And ultimately, I think you come away from that believing that, there is ample evidence for faith in a creator. And from there, I just gave them a bunch of different videos and articles to read that would support various arguments that would have come up in the debate. So we're having continued conversations with them, and I hope that they will come to the same faith in God that we have as we move forward. Now, one more thing I want to mention about Joseph specifically is that he also asked me to study with him on putting together lessons. And so I spent about 2 hours with him during our last Sunday going over how to put together lessons. We focused some on things that I had already taught. We focused some on specifics around the Lord's table because he generally leads those talks. But we also talked about some ways that we could get others involved. And so I think that those conversations went really well. And so I'll be working with Joseph moving forward. And hopefully for tonight, the Bible study starts at 6. And so I'm hoping that I can participate in the Bible study this evening. I also was able to spend some time with William Stewart, his wife Shelley, and his daughter Linda. I met William at Sean Cavender, my friend's funeral. William and Sean were very good friends, and he and I have corresponded a good bit since Sean's passing. And so I wanted to make sure I got over to see him. He lives in Kingston, which is about 2 hours from where we were staying. So we met in the middle and spent the whole day together. And it was a very encouraging get-together. And one thing that came out of that is that he publishes, he did this with Sean, but he has a online magazine called Growth Magazine. And so one of the things he asked is if I would be willing to write for him. And I already had that in my mind when I was going to talk to him. So I'm going to be writing an article for Growth Magazine in January on becoming more like Jesus with the topic of reverence. And so I've got 2 more slides I want to share with you. Lisa and I celebrated our 16th anniversary while we were in Canada. You can see on the picture on the left side that I didn't even get to sit next to my wife during our celebratory lunch on account of 3 kids. And interestingly, it's the wax anniversary, and the good thing is we were able to celebrate that because by the time we got to blow out those candles, there was a bunch of wax that had gotten down into our cake. So, we got that one knocked out. But as I said before, never did we ever entertain the idea that we would get to do something like this. And I don't know what blessings will ultimately come out of it beyond what I've already mentioned this evening, but I've got to think that as the kids get older, they're going to think about that time, they're going to think about service, and they're going to, 1, know that we're serious about service, but then 2, I think they're going to want to do those kinds of things as well. And so it's just an awesome thought to think about. And then lastly, the Bats of Peterborough County heard we were staying, and so they sent a representative. They wanted to welcome us into the neighborhood, and there was a bat in our in our house, and fortunately, my father-in-law was there that weekend, and so he and I got up early in the morning. We captured that bat in a jar, and we took it outside, and we thanked it for its visit, and we sent it back to the rest of the bats. Oh, it's crazy. Moving forward, though, I want to just conclude with these thoughts that Jesus had. I've been asked, would I be willing to go back? And I certainly want to go back. I want to see Joseph and Cecilia again. I want to see the rest of our brethren in Peterborough again. But it also has me thinking about other opportunities, because there's not just one opportunity in Peterborough. There's opportunities in Smyrna. There's opportunities in Tennessee. There's opportunities in the United States. There's opportunities everywhere. There are congregations right now that exist. They're open, but they don't have a preacher. And what does Jesus say about this? My food is to do the will of Him who sent me and to finish His work. Do you not say there are 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift your eyes up and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. And he who receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this the saying is true, one sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labors. The fields are white for harvest. There are still people in this world who have never heard the truth taught to them. I studied with many of them last month. There are people like that in Murfreesboro. There's people like that in Cannon County and everywhere else you can think of. And so I hope that this is not a one-time thing that we engage in, but that this is something that we can continue to do moving forward, that we can be a congregation that has people who are willing to go and has leadership who's willing to send. And just imagine what we can do if we'll participate in these kinds of works together on into the future. So again, I thank you for your support in sending us to Canada. And if you don't remember anything else, remember this: we saw God's providence in action. You can't explain it any other way. I'm talking to David. I'm saying, hey, what if we rented an Airbnb? And 2 days later, we get an email, and there's a congregation, and they want somebody to come up and stay with them? That's 2 days. That's like one day of praying, hey, God, could you make this happen? And the next day, He says yes. We didn't get stopped at the border. Okay, that bat didn't kill us. All right? Providence. I have been dead tired for the last 2 weeks, but I wasn't a bit tired when I was up there. It's just strength. I can't explain it any other way. And we've seen God's hand in this. We've seen His providence in action, and I hope we don't forget it, because it was awesome. And it can continue to be awesome if we continue to work. And so that's all I want to share with you tonight. We'll have an invitation song, and as always, we do want you to know if there's anything that any of us can do to help you, you just got to let us know, and we'll all support you as best we can. Let's have our invitation song.